It is cherry blossom time in Ann Arbor as the Wolverine arrives and stops at the station. It is also time for the Twilight Limited to arrive. The timetable schedules these two trains 15 minutes apart, but the Ann Arbor meet is quite frequent. The Wolverine departs, and the Twilight passengers have already boarded. Note the freight on the eastbound track, which followed the Wolverine into the station. As the Twilight departs from the west side of the station, the local freight also departs. At Ypsilanti, train number 44, the New York Special, comes along the water level route of the Huron River. A C&O car is in the consist. The New York Special is now eastbound near Wayne, Michigan. In a dramatic change of weather, the New York Special is seen crossing the Huron River. In 1954, a Hudson was still powering the Queen City, train number 303, as it passes the McLouth Steel Plant in Trenton, Michigan. The Queen City was a Detroit to Cincinnati train. As an eastbound freight passes the Central Union Terminal in Toledo, Ohio, train number 59, the Chicagoan, departs behind a pair of passenger locomotive models not seen thus far in this show. This station was built shortly after World War II with the intent of serving 5 railroads: the New York Central, the Baltimore and Ohio, the Chesapeake and Ohio, the Pierre Marquette, and the Wabash. However, the Wabash discontinued service to Toledo, and the Pierre Marquette was acquired by the C&O. The Central finished the station with the B&O and C&O paying for lease space. Thus the name Central Union Terminal. On a clear summer day in 1961, the Chicagoan arrives at Elkhart, Indiana. The jade green paint job on this E unit was one of only 3 such painted engines within the New York Central system. This is train number 35, the Iroquois, approaching Toledo Station in 1962. It will soon cross the Maumee River Bridge just before reaching the station. This is train number 397, the Timberliner. It was a Friday-only run from Detroit to the resort area at Mackinac City. This scene shows the last run as it goes north through Oxford. It was discontinued in September 1962. This is Poughkeepsie Station. A New Haven local is crossing the Hudson River as New York Central train number 2, the Pacemaker, arrives eastbound. This train departed Chicago a half hour ahead of the 20th Century Limited. Due to the Pacemaker's numerous station stops, the 20th would pass it during the night almost anywhere after Toledo. And here is the 20th Century Limited on another day as it follows the Pacemaker. The 20th Century Limited was the premier train of the New York Central. The extra attention to the train is evident from the crisp lightning stripes on the engine to the gleam on the rear-end car. With an eastbound freight holding on the main line, train number 6, the Fifth Avenue, combined with the Cleveland Limited, comes out of Central Union Terminal on its way to New York. On another day in Toledo, the Fifth Avenue comes across the Maumee River Bridge with fresh paint and a herald described as a gold cigar band on its nose. Marion, Ohio also hosted the Erie-Lackawanna Railroad as a westbound freight arrives and is approached by New York Central train number 312, the Southwestern. The 1963 National Convention for the National Model Railroad Association was held in Indianapolis. Train number 341, the Knickerbocker, is arriving, but stealing the limelight is the General, the locomotive made famous during the Civil War when it was stolen by Union raiders and the resulting Great Locomotive Chase. The engine had been restored by the Louisville and Nashville Railroad for a centennial tour commemorating the war. The General is now on permanent display in its own museum in Kennesaw, Georgia. Amsterdam, New York is host to the arrival of the Ohio State Limited, train number 15. This New York to St. Louis train provided sleeping cars for a continuous ride of 24.5 hours, covering a distance of 1,156 miles. In January 1956, the New York Central launched a lightweight train program with the introduction of the General Motors Aerotrain service between Detroit and Chicago. The Detroit to Chicago train was number 361, the Great Lakes Aerotrain. The Aerotrain was a fresh new concept of lightweight, high-speed train service, but the ride quality was never the equal to full-size cars. The external appearance of the train was striking, to say the least, and the design was superbly crafted by the General Motors styling section. A single 1,200 horsepower engine was used strictly for motive power. Auxiliary power was provided for lighting, heat, and cooling. The train could attain speeds of slightly over 100 miles per hour with the right track and confined right-of-way properly controlled. Another experiment by the Central was a jet-powered Budd rail car in 1966. The car is being moved into position for final inspection before a speed trial. The jet car was named Pride of the Central. It was powered by a pair of General Electric J47 jet engines. The occasion was somewhat informal, as the locals and a few rail fans were able to gather at the site, much as if it were a conventional train departing from a small town station. The film camera is running in slow motion as the Pride jets by. In just over a minute, it covers 3 miles at 183 miles per hour. The station for Lamont, Illinois was built in 1853. This pre-Civil War location is an appropriate setting as the Gulf, Mobile, and Ohio train, the Abraham Lincoln, passes by. Sometime later, we find the Abraham Lincoln west of Lamont as it heads east. Joliet Tower has seen the passage of many trains over the years, and the GM&O has played out its fair share. EMD locomotive number 102 and E7A pulls train number 1, the Limited, as orders are picked up at J.O. Tower in Joliet, Illinois. The Baltimore and Ohio was still using steam in 1954 when the Cincinnatian came under the West Road Bridge in Trenton. Moving ahead to 1963, we still find semaphores, but no steam, as the Cincinnatian crosses the former Wabash tracks at Delray Junction near Dearborn. A few years later, the Cincinnatian arrives in Toledo with C&O equipment on both the front and rear of this B&O train. In an effort to reduce operating costs, the B&O began operating these RDC-3 Bud cars as their Saturday run of the Cincinnatian. This was also the time of a planned merger between the B&O and the C&O and apparent free interchange of equipment as seen here. Now arriving in Fostoria, Ohio, is the westbound B&O Shenandoah, train number 7. It crosses the C&O tracks, slowing for the Fostoria station stop. The spring of 1965 brought a special B&O passenger train across the Maumee River Bridge. This is an excursion extra returning from Washington, D.C. It was known as the Cherry Blossom Special, and it ran annually for high school students for a visit to the nation's capital. As the C&O freight moves slowly into Junction Yard in Dearborn, the C&O passenger train number 1, the George Washington, rushes past. The George Washington is captured here snaking its way through the switches at Oakdale Junction as it proceeds to Central Union Terminal in Toledo. On the Chicago, Burlington, and Quincy, west of Downers Grove, north of Chicago, at a location known as Callender Curve, the combined trains, the Nebraska Zephyr and the Kansas City Zephyr, kick up the powdered snow in passing. Now, only a few months later, CB&Q train number 5 stops at Plano, Illinois. It was formerly known as the Kansas City Zephyr, but by now the run to Kansas City had been discontinued, and it is no longer a named train. Its destination is Quincy, Illinois. A northbound freight is coming through Lisle, Illinois with 4 locomotives, one of which is an experimental paint scheme for the forthcoming Burlington Northern merger. Close on its heels is the Afternoon Zephyr, GN Builder, and the NP North Coast Limited combined train. Another BN experimental paint scheme is the green and white hockey stick on the diner at mid-train. Milwaukee Road train number 6, the Morning Hiawatha, approaches Noble Street Tower in April of 1962 on its 410-mile run from St. Paul and Minneapolis. This train arrives at Union Station at 2:40 p.m. The following January, the westbound Afternoon Hiawatha, with much mail and express, storms up a blizzard of snow as it hurries through Rondout, Illinois. The Milwaukee Road typically had an inbound morning commuter rush at Morton Grove, Illinois. The first train through on this spring day is the Pioneer Limited, and it's not slowing for commuters. Train number 22, the Sioux, is not living up to its fast train status as it drifts slowly through Glenview. Back at Rondout, train number 117, the Varsity, slows for orders, then turns off to the Fox Lake branch on its way to the college town of Madison. We are in Marion, Ohio, and the merger of the Erie Railroad with the Delaware, Lackawanna, and Western Railroad on October 19, 1960, is now 20 months on the history books. Typical of all mergers, evidence of pre-merger paint schemes endure a slow transition. This Alco PA1 unit with the Erie two-tone green paint is original in every respect. The trailing Lackawanna E8A is in a new paint scheme. The train is the Pacific Express, train number 7. Now, 2 years later, the Pacific Express is again leaving Marion. Only now the motive power is completely covered in the official Erie-Lackawanna paint scheme. This train is primarily a mail train and has coach